Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Heather Gallagher, and on behalf of Geelong Regional Libraries, I'm delighted to welcome you here today to the Local Word Writers Festival and today's panel discussion, Creating Fantastic Picture Books for Kids, with panellists Sue Lawson, Sally Learey and Kat Fox. I would like to start by acknowledging the Wadawurrung people of the Kulin Nation and the Gulingin and Gudabunnud peoples of the Maar Nations as the original owners of the land on which our library services operate. We pay respects to elders past, present and emerging. We acknowledge and celebrate First Nations people of this land as the custodians of learning, literacy, knowledge and story. Now I'd like to introduce you formally to our lovely panellists. Sue Lawson is an award-winning children's author who writes books that challenge and delight. She's passionate about developing a love of reading in young people. Sue's books include award-winning young adult novel Freedom Ride and the picture book The Biscuit Maker. Sue also writes with Wadawurrung elder Auntie Faye Muir. Their highly acclaimed picture books, Respect, Family and Sharing, are part of the Magabala Books Our Place series. Welcome, Sue.
Thank you, Heather.
Sally Learey is a children's author, trained teacher and counsellor. She self-published her first book, Food for Me is Gluten-Free, to support her son after he was diagnosed with celiac disease. Since then, she's gone on to have a successful self-publishing career with 6 more picture books, combining fact and fiction. She writes to educate, entertain and inspire the reader. 2 of her titles are on the Victorian Premier's Reading Challenge list. Welcome, Sally.
Thank you.
And our final panellist is Kat Fox. She is an English-born children's book illustrator and art educator who now lives on the Surf Coast. Kat loves slapstick and whimsy. Her illustrations are bright, cartoonish and expressive. Her art has featured in traditional and self-published picture books and junior fiction. Welcome, Kat. Now, even though I am the facilitator, I'm also a picture book author, so I will be contributing to our conversation. I'm a children's author, book reviewer, and award-winning journalist. I'm passionate about children's literacy, and I work as a writer-in-residence for primary schools with the educational charity RDoc. My latest picture book, Scaredy Cat, which you'll see on the slides, is based on my anxious dog, Pip. So I thought we might start off today by talking about why picture books are such an important medium for kids. Sue, would you like to get us started on that one?
Absolutely. We've only got an hour, so I'm going to keep it really short. Picture books are vital to children from the time they are little, and it's not just the words and the literacy of the beautiful pictures, it's that snuggling in and reading. That's what's really important. And children who are snuggled on laps and read go on to become readers. And they just allow children to experience the world in a safe way with things they may never actually encounter. So, children can work, for example, with Heather's book, Mummy's Happy Pants. They may never have a mum who has postnatal depression, but they can see what that's like for a child in a safe, secure way. So picture books are beautiful. They're beginning teachers of empathy, and they're also the beginning of our reading journey.
A great answer and a beautiful plug. Thank you, Sue.
That's okay, I'm good at the plug.
Sally, what have you got to say about that?
Look, I agree with the connection piece. It connects children to parents, it connects children to other children, and indeed it connects children to the characters in the story, and it's also the beginning of literacy. So even if the child can't read the words or there's no one to read the book to them, they can narrate and they can use their oral language to look at the illustrations and tell their own story. And that's very powerful because it's giving them a key message that I have a voice and that I'm able to be the author of my own story and my own journey. And of course, we also know that kids, when they find a book they love, they want it again and again and again and again, even though we say, wouldn't you like this tonight? So I remember as a child doing exactly the same thing. I'm sorry, Mum. And so essentially it really is also about having confidence that the reason a child asks for the same book over and over again is because they've got confidence in knowing what happens in the story, and it gives them a sense of predictability and a sense of empowerment. So they're just a couple of reasons. I could talk for a long time, but I'll stop.
It's tough, isn't it?
And Kat, as our illustrator representative.
Well, I mean, they've said everything, so I could just sit here and go, well, no, that's me. No, look, it is really, that connection thing is the hugest thing. In a world where we're filled with social media and everything and, you know, like devices, we're very busy as parents as well, but being able to give our time to our child when they're young, especially at night time, it sets them up for really good nighttime routines as well. And my 12-year-old now, she will lay there and read a book to go to sleep. So it set her up with the beauty and the habit. And I remember even being a child, for me, illustrations calmed my brain so I could sleep. And that's what I'm going to add to that amazing plethora of ideas.
Beautiful. Kat, we'll start with you for the next one. What do you think are the ingredients of a great picture book?
Okay, well, there's lots of ingredients, so I won't go through all of them so we can all have a go. Obviously, the ingredients are fabulous illustrations by me. And I mean, I've got them written down there, but it's all about the vibrancy of the illustrations. And I think it's really having a really good, being able to have a message in your book as well works really well. And another thing I'm going to add, because there are loads of other ones, but another thing that's important is that your book is beautifully presented. The way it's printed, the way it's set up, all that is really important. It becomes a beautiful product and it becomes an artwork in its own and something to savour and cherish. Over to you.
Yes,
My turn. I like to think of a picture book as taking a reader on a journey, and part of that journey often involves solving a problem or a challenge, and the reader is on board with that problem and that challenge, and so they get a real sense of satisfaction when at the end of the story that problem is solved. The other thing that I think is really special in terms of a great ingredient for a book is having characters in the story that the reader can relate to, and whether that be somebody that they think, oh, I know that person, whether that person's me, or maybe they'll meet that person or that character somewhere along the way. I might just give an example. In one of my books, I created a family, and that family became well loved, and people said, could you put that family in the next book, please? And could you put them in the next book? And they're in 3 books. And they had a baby. So in my last book, the baby's in there as well. So it's really around, oh, we know you. We know you. We feel so connected with you. So I think that's really special in connecting the story and the illustrations as well. And they're familiar. They're comforting.
Thanks, Sally. And Sue?
I'm going to talk from the author's point of view. I think what makes a really good picture book is one that the author and the illustrator are connected into the heart. You can write a picture book about anything if you really care about it, because writing picture books is really hard work. Very, very hard work, but very rewarding. So you've got to really be passionate about that thing. So for me, if I'm writing, if I get a commission, can you write this, which I don't do often, but sometimes I do, always takes me longer to find me in the story, the heart of what really interests me. So as a writer and an illustrator, I think that extra bit of magic is that passion, that really caring about the book, caring about the character. And I think too, you need to care about kids. It's like teaching. When I used to teach, I'd often look at other teachers, and they were older, which I am now, but I'd look and go, why are you teaching, you grumpy old bag? You don't even like the kids. I think it's the same with writing. Don't write for kids if you don't love kids.
Doesn't Lee Hobbs famously not like
Yeah,
kids?
he does. He does.
And Quentin
not,
Blake hates
Yep.
kids.
They don't like, but you look at what they write. It's funny. A lot of it's like adult humour, and I really believe you've got to have a connection with kids and understand their point of view of the world. Maybe you don't need to like them, but you need to understand how they see the world.
I guess I'd just add to that, I don't think it's an essential ingredient, but it works really well if, as a writer, you focus on the sound of the story. So you've got that read aloud, like whether it's rhyming or alliteration, or like little catchphrases that kids can join in on. So repetition, all those sort of poetic techniques, they can work really well in picture books to engage children. If children feel like they can actually interact in the story, particularly younger kids, I've found that's a really effective way of engaging children in picture books.
Yep. Always read your work out loud, always, whether you're writing a 70,000 word novel or whether you're writing a 79 word picture book. And where you stumble, pay attention. And then if you've got someone who's patient, get them to read it to you too. And listen critically, is this flowing? That's really important, Heather.
So these are going to be longer responses. I thought it might be interesting for us each to go through how our very first picture book came to be. So, Sally, would you like to start with that one?
Sure. I'm going to go back to probably when I was maybe in about year 9, and, when people say, what do you want to be? Who do you want to be when you grow up? And I thought, I think I want to be a journalist, actually. And then when I realised that you really needed to go and get work experience at a local newspaper, I thought, I don't think I want to be a journalist anymore. That's going to eat into my weekend. So in the back of my mind, there was always a love of writing, and I particularly loved picture books. For my 21st birthday, I requested a set of picture books. Everyone would say, that's just Sally. So I was not an author until the day we came a time where my son was well. So my son was very, very unwell, and he had undiagnosed celiac disease, and this is back in 2002, wasn't very really heard of. And we spent a lot of years, and he went on a gluten-free diet when we found out he did have celiac disease, but he didn't recover. So he was actually dying of malnutrition. So it's not a great story there. But we worked tirelessly to work out what was going on, and eventually we kick-started his system, and I knew that he was going to be okay. So I said to him, buddy, let's go to the library and let's find a book about celiac disease for children so we can read it together. Because that's what we always did. We lived in the library. And I remember going to the local library, which was Belmont at the time, no book. So I asked the librarian staff, could you do a check for the interlibrary loan system and, let me know if you come across a book on celiac disease for kids. And they contacted me and said, Sally, there are no books. So I did what any good mother would do. I wrote one. So
Setting the bar a bit high there, Sally.
My first book was for my son. Interesting story. We had 3 people in our family diagnosed with celiac disease in 2 weeks. So my eldest daughter, and then because it's largely heavily genetic, my husband as well. So what I did was decide that I needed to write this book really quickly because I wanted my son to have it. And so I didn't look at traditional publishing. I literally just said, I'm going to write a book for my son. I don't know how I'm going to do this. There weren't books out there about self-publishing at the time. You couldn't look it up on Google. And so I decided to get voice from my own kids and my own family and write a book that literally Lachlan could cherish and share with people. And it ended up being something that connected with so many other people, and I guess I'm really proud to say that that book is not only Australia-wide but across different countries, and has become a very helpful resource for health professionals, medical professionals, different kids. I'd get emails from parents saying, thank you so much, my child sleeps with your book. They carry the book everywhere they go. And I thought, oh my goodness, so does my son. So not only did I meet my son's needs, I realised that I was meeting other people's needs. And that was the beginning of the journey. I thought it would end there, but little did I know that it wasn't the ending. And the power of that is that my son would then read that. He took that book to school, and he was able to read that. He actually learnt it off by heart and share his story. And then no one ever said to him, oh, how come you bring your own food to a party? How come you bring your own lunchbox? How come you this? How come you that? What they actually said was, what? Your mum wrote a book for you? That's so cool. So that was the impetus, just a heartfelt reason. And then out came, well, what have I got now? Eight books now. So hopefully I've answered that question.
Can I ask how old was Lachlan at that time?
Yeah, so he was 3 at the time. He was basically, he had no language. He couldn't move his arms and legs and limbs, and we really didn't quite know what was going on with him. And in fact, what happened with him was because he had celiac disease, and you absorb all your nutrients in the small intestine, and so he wasn't able to absorb nutrients, so it also affected his brain development. And in fact, it did compromise his brain development moving on in life, because you are what you eat. But that book has enabled us to do so much in that space beyond just this is a book about celiac disease. It's been about telling stories, standing up and being an advocate for disabilities. And the book was about inclusivity, and I actually included my whole family. So I included my other daughter who has got celiac disease as well, but my other daughter who doesn't, so that the message was, if we understand everybody as a unique, amazing individual person and we respect their differences. So the story was about how do I get a message of disability across, but how do I also get a message of inclusiveness? And that's what I did. And I said to my illustrator, do not put me in the book. And he did. I said, why does that mother look exactly like me, and why is she dressed the way that I was dressed when you met me? He said, I don't know. And why does she have curly hair?
Thanks for sharing that, Sally.
You're welcome.
It's a very, very heartfelt story. Kat, can you tell us about your first picture book experience?
It's almost similar to Sally's in a way. I've always found picture books amazing as a child, very comforting. Unbeknownst to me, I was just absolutely adored illustrations all through my life, and drawing, and this equated into a career in the arts and interior design, and then education. And then I had 3 children, and as I was reading them goodnight stories and things, I started to realise that whenever I went to art galleries, I was always over in the picture book section. Whenever I go into a bookshop, I get excited about the picture books because they were artworks on their own, and they were actually pleasing me as a mother. And the thing that got me into drawing and away from the design industry was the passing of my father. When he was diagnosed with cancer, I went back to the UK and I sat with him while he was having a treatment, and I didn't know what to do, and he grabbed out a pen and paper and said to me, draw like you did when you were younger. And I didn't know what to draw, so I saw, this is God's honest truth, I saw a balloon floating out of the window and I drew this balloon, and then he smiled. Then I decided I'm just going to draw anything to do with flight. And then he started handing them out to the other chemo patients. And to get me through the grief, I just drew every single day. And out of that, I started to get really fascinated with children's books. And I was, my son, this is leading to this, but my son at the time was displaying early ADHD behaviours, such as he was very quirky and he used to love to be a bird, and he used to jump and perch on the side of the couch, and he was 6 years old and he'd peck, and we just went through this really weird period in our family where we were like, is he okay? But he's quite funny, let's keep him going. He put his arms in his t-shirt and float around. And I was sitting there with a girlfriend of mine, bit of a midlife crisis, getting up to 40, and we're having our wines and having a chat, and I'm telling her about Joe and how much I love drawing, and I'd started to get commissions to draw quirky pictures for people, for their families, name arts and things, and I told her the story of Joe, and then we were drinking and we started turning it into a storybook together, and hence Bird Boy and Wren was born, of a little boy who was different to everyone else and didn't know quite how to fit into the world because all he wanted to do was fly. And my confidence with writing wasn't brilliant, but she was a teacher, so Linda actually wrote the book, and I illustrated my first ever book. I'd never illustrated a book in my life, so I went and did a course with Sue DeGenero. I taught myself everything I could know. I spoke to other illustrators, and I was able to pull together a book, not only a book. The book turned into a bed linen range, an award-winning bed linen range, and I created a label called Cat Fox. So it's a colouring book, it was a book, and it was a bed linen range for children, all about building that connectivity between mother and child, or father and child, or parent and child in the bedroom. And I won an award for that. So that was my first ever experience, and since then it's just gone from strength to strength through networking and through people approaching me. So that was my first book. Anyway, there you go,
folks. A bit of alcohol doesn't hurt. Sue, can you tell us about your first picture book experience?
Oh, yeah, I can. I'm not sure I've actually told this story before, but I always wanted to be a writer. I wanted to be a journalist, and I always wanted to write a book. I knew from when I was little I wanted to write a book one day, but I didn't do it because I thought I'd be crap at it. Why would you do it? And then went off and decided I'd do journalism and radio, because if anything was bad, it went off into the ether. Then, when I was pregnant, I lost the ability to walk. Everything stopped from here down. You know, some things still worked, but only when they wanted to. And it turned out I had a tumour on my spine, and I had to learn to walk again. And after that, I went to my poor husband, to a marriage counsellor, because it took me, I don't know how long to learn to walk. My daughter was a month old when I had the surgery. You know, it was just a nightmare. But we finally get back to Horsham, where we were living at the time, after I'd been living in Hamilton with my parents for 2-3 months. Finally get back, and Veriska, oh, so good to have you and Courtney home, this is great. And I said, and we're going to a marriage counsellor. He goes, what? I said, well, you needn't think we've been through this to ever break up, because you hear those stories about people who do go through that. So long and the short of it is, this counsellor said to me, write about it, write about what you've been through. And I started, on those big fat computer screens that were about that deep, well before the internet. Like Court's 30 now, nearly 30, so that long ago. Just sitting when she was asleep, in my wheelchair, writing. And I suddenly went, why the hell did I ever stop? Why did I stop? And I started doing courses and courses. My first picture book came when a friend of Kay's and mine was giving me exercises. She'd give me writing exercises and say, we met on a John Marsden camp, And she would say to me, I'm going to send you some stuff to get you writing, just some warm-ups. And one of them was called My Grand's Different. And I'd been off watching blue whales off Port Fairy coast, came back as high as a kite, you know, just woo-hoo. My daughter and husband didn't go. I went, and it's a really rough trip out to Lady Julia Percy Island, and I was doubly excited. We saw a blue whale, which we didn't expect, and I didn't get seasick. So I've come home, so I've sat down, I've just started scribbling with the pen, finished and went, hell, I think this is a book. And with her help, you know, we polished it up. And then when I went to another John Marsden camp, I got paired with Helen Chamberlain, who works at Lothian, and used to work at a company called Lothian, and I was showing her Dragon's Tear, which was my first published book, a junior fiction book, about 30,000 words. And I did something, and I don't even know why I did it, because I'd read everywhere, don't do it. I pulled out the manuscript for My Grand's Different and just said, Kay's going, oh, you don't do that. So's Heather, so are these guys. And I did, and I went, you might just want to have a look at that. And that was the first book she accepted. She looked at it and went, I'm taking that. That's a yes. Go back and work on Dragon's Tear, and then we'll publish that. And that's how my first book got published. But what it was for me, it was breaking through the fear that I wouldn't be any good. I've now got something like 35 books. There's about 7 more in the various pipeline. If it hadn't been for the tumour, I could have done without 5 of them, honest to God. It was a bit over the top. But if it hadn't been for that first tumour, I would never have written a book. So what I'm saying to you as writers, we were talking in the lift and I said to one, you need bum glue, get the bum glue. You've just got to sit and work at it, and it does happen. If it happened to me and happened to these guys and it's happened to Kay, it will happen to you. You've just got to keep working at it and get rid of that fear. Read the book by Elizabeth Gilbert. Yep, and she talks about in your office.
Big magic.
Yeah, it's so good. And she says in your wodgy, in your office, have a chair, and that's where fear sits when you're writing. You say to fear, you sit there, I'll come and get you when I'm done for the day. So it's a really good book, isn't it? Who did you read it to? Kate?
And I think something that stuck with me, it might have been one of her podcasts, but there was the one about ideas. We don't actually own an idea. Yes. An idea floats through us, and if you don't jump on it, she talked about one of her books, if you don't just jump on that idea when you do it, it's okay because it will pass on to someone else. Have you ever had those moments where you've gone, I actually came up with that idea, you've stolen that idea off me? Well, no, because that idea is just floating through. It's not owned by you. You have to have the balls to get up.
Anne Patchett's book, she had this whole book ready to go about the Amazon and buildings in the Amazon and blah. And for years there was stuff happening, she didn't do it. And then she always loved Anne Patchett's writing, and then she picked up Anne Patchett's new book, and it was almost the same thing. They'd never spoken about it. So she's got this theory, the idea will come to you, and if you don't use it, it'll just go radio and shoof off to the next person.
And if you can't trawl through a big book, Elizabeth Gilbert is fantastic on her podcast. Just great to listen to. So she's
a great writer. I read Eat, Pray, Love and went, and then I read her fiction and went. I liked Pray and Love. I got a bit sick of eating. There's a statement. But
but that's my dream. I'm going to Eat, Pray, Love next year.
But her fiction books are unbelievable. City of Girls is highly recommend that. It's great.
Sorry, we're just promoting.
That's right.
We've taken over.
I've been waggling my eyebrows, but it's to no effect. I feel like there's a real common theme amongst everyone's first experiences, and it echoes my experience as well. So my first picture book was Happy Pants, which came off the back of my experience with postnatal depression. And a lot of people had suggested to me that, I should write about my experience of depression, and I was like, who wants to read about that? But also I just did not know how I could write it in a way that it would work for children. And it was actually when I had a recurring bout of depression when I first moved from Melbourne to Ocean Grove, which is going up 12 years now. And I remember saying to myself one day, I've just got to put on my happy pants and go out and see people. And that's when I had that lightning bolt moment of, oh my God, what a fantastic metaphor to explain depression to children. And I just sat down and pretty much wrote it kind of like what you were talking about, Sue. It just all poured out.
And by
you know.
hand, Heather.
Yeah.
It's amazing, isn't it? Yeah.
And just that idea of, when mum's pregnant, she's wearing her happy pants, but when she comes home with the baby, she can't put her happy pants back on. And the little boy tries to put mum's happy... It's a bit of a tearjerker. I was quite proud. I've made a lot of people cry with that book. But I think what we're all saying is that our first stories really came from a place of heart, which is something I would encourage any aspiring authors in the audience to think about. What is it that's really in your heart that you would like to put out there in the world? Because I think that makes for a really powerful story. So moving on, this is a nice segue. How do you get ideas for picture books? Sue, would you like to start us off?
Oh gosh, they're no different to ideas for any other book. For me, they're questions that won't go away. They're just little niggles. The biscuit maker was... I was visiting my aunt who lived in North Balwyn, and round North Balwyn they had these beautiful old homes that are all being knocked down for these big square, 2-storey, ugly, no beautiful gardens. And I was thinking it must be really hard for people who've lived here forever and their sense of community. That community of all getting together and doing things. Even if you didn't like very much, you'd know, so-and-so up the road's not well, I'll just pop up with a casserole, whatever. And I was thinking about where is that sense of community gone and how do we build it back? And then I listened to a podcast about Gillian Mears. If you ever get to listen to her talk about, she's the Australian girl who lost both legs in the London bombing all that time ago. It's actually, she's quite funny. She talks about the fact that she had no pulse, but she was still talking. Yeah. Like she was actually, the legs are gone, they tourniqueted, she's in the ambulance and they're going, she's, no pulse, she's dead, and she's chatting to them. And I thought, oh, that'll be me. I'll still be going. But she talks about that, and she actually talks about the Ambo driver going, yes, we no signs and you're... But she talked about doing this walk from the top of England to the bottom of England to bring together communities. And at that stage, she really focused on Muslim people because it was a Muslim bombing. It was during all that terrorism. And she said in one town, this couple these two people that were neighbours, one was Muslim, one wasn't. She said in 3 steps, because she said if she could walk with fake legs, anyone could do it. So 3 steps, they were bitching about the person next door never bringing their bin in. And she just went, and it just made me go, yes, we just need to find a way to connect. So that's how that idea came about. So for me, it's watching everything. It's watching when I'm in the classroom, watching the kids. Questions, why does someone behave like that? Why do they do that? And then I'll play with it and see if I've got a problem in there. Sometimes you don't. With respect and family and sharing, there's no problem in that. They're more poetic. They're about First Nations culture. But again, that was Faye and I talking, going, how do we teach, Auntie Faye that I write with, we teach children about First Nations culture? And we came up with that. Mr. Beakey my publisher paired me up with Cassie Latham, who has a blue budgie called Mr. Beakey, who speaks language. It's quite fascinating. Have a look at them. I know if you'd told me I was going to write a book about a budgie, I'd have told you you'd lost your mind. But anyway, I have. And so this budgie, she uses it when she works with children to show budgies in the wild are green and gold. This budgie's blue. Doesn't make him less a budgie. And then she goes, and I'm a fair-skinned Aboriginal person. What the colour of my skin doesn't make me Aboriginal. So and then it's how do I put that together? So for me, ideas are everywhere. It's just what interests me, what picks at my brain, and I want to explore.
Thanks, Sue. Sally.
So I just had to remind myself of the question.
Oh,
I just read
sorry.
it. How do we get ideas for picture books?
Yeah.
So ideas come to me. Talking before about an idea coming through you and to you, through you, past you. The ideas drop into my brain and they normally aren't soft in the beginning, actually. They're normally quite loud and say, write me. You need to write this, you need to write this, you need to write this. until it becomes overwhelming. And I will announce to my family, I have to write a book, and it's about this. And that is how every single one of my books has come to fruition. It's about having something to say, and that heartfelt message that you have inside of you, I don't know any other way to write. There's a piece of me in every book I write. There are characters that I know in terms of people in my life that are in my book. My animals are in the illustrations. It is just something that knocks loudly. In fact, when I wrote my first children's picture book about Geelong called Corio Bay Kingdom, I actually wrote my second follow-on book straight after I drafted the manuscript, and I put it in a cupboard and said, that needs to be written too, but not right now. So the idea comes to me. I will tell you a little bit about that book that connects to my son. So the first time my son actually created a sentence, this was the sentence: Mummy, I don't want to barrack for Collingwood anymore.
Oh, I know that feeling, but it won't leave.
And I was in a dilemma because I grew up in Melbourne. My grandfather was the oldest living Collingwood Football Club member at the time, and I have black and white blood through my veins. But we were living in Geelong, and I was in this quandary, and I just thought, he's just spoken a sentence. But no.
And now I have to divorce
So
him
I
just when he's speaking.
my son, so I paused and I sat him down and I said, buddy, in life, there are some things you can choose and some things you can't. I love your sentence, but that sentence is one of the ones you can't choose. You can't change teams.
Remember I told you Sally's a counsellor.
And he looked at me and he said, but Mummy, Collingwood don't mean anything to me.
Oh.
Geelong does.
Oh, no.
And I just thought, you little bugger. And I looked at him and I thought, this is such an incredible situation. Not only has he created a sentence, it's backed by thought. He has real reason around this. And all I've been praying for is for him to be able to do this and speak. And so I said to him, here's what we'll do, bud. You may change teams, but you need to promise me that you will not tell Great Papa. And we shook on it and we agreed. So that was the beginning of a nightmare for me, because my husband's family started dropping off Geelong merchandise and here, there and everywhere, and it was all happening. And meanwhile, I had, there was this real challenge going on inside of me, saying, I can't just sit with this, but I can't tell my grandfather, very close to my grandfather. Used to go to the football as a child with my grandfather. It was just a big connection. And I thought, I need to let this out somehow. How will I let it out? And you know what I'm going to say? I'm going to write a book about it. And the book was about the pull of culture and community. So interestingly, I'm segueing and piggybacking off what Sue said. I said, I need to write a book about the pull of culture and community, because that's the reason he's changed teams. Because he lives here and he's telling me, Geelong, I'm a part of Geelong. So that's when I realised that was a niche. Well, I realised just by default that was a niche for me. So I wrote a combination of a picture book that was fact and fiction. And it was about a boy that barracked for Collingwood and he moved to Geelong and he didn't want to be here. And he was in his Collingwood Guernsey, and he has a sister whose name is Zara, and she's a princess, and everything in her world is fantasy and magic, and she was so excited to be here, and he was just grumpy. And his parents said, "Hey mate, we can take you to watch a game of footy," and he said, "I don't want to go, it's Geelong." And at the end of the day, through experiences that he enjoyed with his family, discovering Geelong and Zara always inviting him into her magical world. And at the end of the story, he ended up getting a birthday present, and the birthday present was the best thing he could ever wish for. And it was a Geelong Guernsey, and it was also a big card that was created by Zara, who then had drawn an illustration saying that he was Prince Angus, and she'd put a crown on his head and she's got a crown on her head, and he was wearing a Guernsey, and he said, "It's the best present that I could have ever wished for." And the tearjerker comes because just before that book was ready, my grandfather, at the age of 103, became very unwell overnight and got pneumonia, and he was hospitalised. And I drove down to see him that very night that they said, "We're not sure if he's going to live through the night." And I drove down with my eldest daughter, who was a Collingwood supporter, because I'd brainwashed her successfully. And we were there and we were chatting, and he was an ex-head teacher, and he was very proud that I was an author. And he took my hand. I'm going to get emotional. He took my hand and he said to me, "Sally, the boy changes teams, doesn't he?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Sally, it's about young Lachlan, isn't it? He's changed teams, hasn't he?" And I said, "He has." And he patted my hand and he said, "It's okay, I understand. He lives in Geelong and it's okay." And he died that night.
Oh.
And sorry, I'm so emotional. And that book's dedicated to him, amongst other people. Sorry.
That's
okay,
That's
okay.
a beautiful story.
I'm going to give you a twist. At the start of this year, my son said to me, "Mum, I'm going to change back to Collingwood."
Wise boy.
And I said, "You can't."
Oh, you didn't?
I can't write another book about that. You do not have permission. Anyway, he actually has changed back, and I said to him, no, my sister came over and she
Is this
said,
because
"Mate,"
Collingwood's top of the ladder?
no, not at all. And my sister came over and she said, "Mate, Lockie, I hear you've changed back to Collingwood. I'm really interested as to why." Because he was a Geelong Football Club member. He went to the Geelong games with my husband, with a companion card so they could sit together. He had a membership. It was all systems go. And he stopped and he thought and he said, "It's because Collingwood are in my cells." And I thought, well, I cannot question that. So can't get more heartfelt than that. And I'm just looking at the question.
How do you get your ideas?
Yeah, so every other book has come to me through that means, saying, "You have to write me. I've literally been powerless. You have to write me." And interesting, I was listening to you talk about the fear chair. There's never been a fear chair. There's just been an excitement chair. And I literally don't sleep because I have to write that book because it's saying, pour the words out. So I've got notepads everywhere, and I'm just like, "Oh, I've got to put that in it, that in it, that in it, that in it, that in it." And I'll say to my family, "Oh my gosh, remember this, remember that word, please. I don't have a notepad right now." I don't put things in phones. I write pen to paper. And that's how I create. So it just happens, bang, 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 bang. I think I've gone over time.
Thanks, Sally. for sharing that very heartfelt story. Kat, how do you get your ideas?
I know. Well, do you want to know where I get my ideas from? Where does an illustrator get their ideas from? The authors. But what I am going to talk about, it from an illustrator's point of view. How do I get my ideas for the illustrations? So, okay, for example, I have this ability when I'm presented with a text from a wonderful, talented author, I make sure I read it quite a few times. I read it to my child, and I've got a background in acting, which helps. So I actually think children's book illustration is a bit like directing a film. It's about producing it. It's about getting it there. So as I read, it appears to me, the characters appear to me. Obviously, if I'm working with self-publishing authors, you can have more of a shared 50-50 discussion about what they see. But a lot of it, I tend to like it when I get a text and I'm allowed to really take my own stance on it and there aren't too many boundaries. Because like I did one called Hamish McGruff and the Lightning Jacket, and I knew obviously that was a schnauzer dog, but I was allowed to, and I do research for the ideas of how it should look, but I start to actually act out the scenes, and I started to act out the scenes as if I was the schnauzer dog, unbeknownst to my whole family. They'd find me curled in the corner, or I'd take a photo of my dog, or I'd get my husband I'd get my whole family to act out scenes. In a book I've done recently, which is It's Great to Be Gluten-Free, I actually, there was a scene where I had to draw out the mum in the kitchen with the child and they were cooking together. So I set up my phone and I actually videoed Emily and I cooking in the kitchen and I created some stills from that, and I was able to sort of create my compositions around photography I've taken. I've had my daughter swinging for Bird Boy and Wren. I had her at a local play park, swinging on swings, climbing up trees. I like the fact that I can sort of direct these scenes. I use sketches, but it is in my head. It comes in here through researching, and then I can pull the pieces together. But it's fun. It's why I love illustration, because I go into this crazy world. And I think it was a question that was asked earlier, or not a question, but it was someone said that something you got to be, for me, to be an illustrator is be a bit of a kid yourself. And if you can take yourself back to that world, you can produce some really awesome ideas and effects.
Thanks, Kat. I guess I just add, for me, I've recently started working with kids, which I'm finding really fantastic for generating ideas. I had a little boy just recently who, so they play these games, they were playing a game called Fruit Salad, and because I'm working in after-school care, it's prep all the way through to grade 6. So if they play a running game, there's no way it can be equitable. It's like the little kids are going to lose. And this little kid lost and he was raging, and then he burst into tears and he went and hid in a bush. And I was like, there's a picture book in that. And so that's been really great for me to come up with ideas. So hanging out with kids, I would say, is really useful for picture book writing.
Stalk the playgrounds, not in a creepy way, but just watch kids play and eavesdrop on kids.
Yeah.
And be the kid.
Them.
Yeah.
Yeah, annoy your own children, hang out with them.
And you just look like, for me, I look like just a sad old grandmother who's clearly missing because you're just watching them going.
So I thought it might be interesting for our audience if we actually went through a bit nitty-gritty how a book is made from start to finish in both the traditional context and also a self-publishing context. So we'll start with traditional publishing, which is something that me and Sue and Kat all have experience of. So Sue, perhaps can you kick us off? Can you start with, we've talked about, how we get our ideas. So we start with our idea and we write our first draft. What happens after that?
You write it again, and you write it again, and you write it again. And you rewrite it, I've written them up to 17, 18 times. You just keep reworking it until it's the best you can be. and find trusted first readers, not someone who's going to go, that's great. That's not going to help you. You need someone who's...
It's always nice when that
yeah,
happens.
it's lovely. And we all hope, this is going to be the one that never is. But find first
We're
readers.
supposed to be inspiring them, Sue.
It's coming. Listen to what they say. You don't have to take it all on. There'll be some things you go, yeah, no, you haven't quite got the idea of my character, and that means go back and rework on your character. So get a trusted first listeners, 1 or 2 or 3, preferably a writer, librarian, someone who reads a lot of picture books. Read a lot of picture books and pay attention to who's publishing them. That, look and go, okay, a book about a budgie. I'd like to write about a budgie. Who's publishing that and why? Yeah. And look at who's publishing them. Come and sit in the library and read books and work out what you like, what resonates with you. When it's ready, when you think you've got it as good as you can get it, and this varies, you send it to a publisher. That, when I say this varies, some people have agents. I've never bothered with an agent, although I got told by an agent that I really should have an agent, because I was in a talk and I said, I don't know about contracts. I just go, yeah, whatever. And she went, you need an agent, ring me. So you either go send it to your agent, and they're as hard to get as a publisher, I think harder. And then your book goes through 1,000 loops. It goes, if the editor says, the one who gets it goes, I like it, it goes to another editor. And if they both like it, it'll be okay. Well, we'll take it to the publishing team. And if they like it, it then goes to sales. And the acquisition meeting, they have to like it. So there's a lot that has to go right for your book to be published. And often if your book is rejected, it's not because it's a good book. They might have just accepted something similar. Or they might have done 5 books about talking elephants in the last 2 years, and they really need to move away from that. So trust that when they say no, and they will, and they still do for us, you get it back, you kick the cat, not metaphorically, you kick the cat, you get angry, and then you go, right, and rework it, and you send it out again.
There's a range of different publishers who are what's called open for submissions. So you can email them directly with your manuscript. Some of them are closed to submissions. Some of them will open periodically throughout the year. So it's really good if you can follow them on social media. Mm-hmm.
Network, Squibby.
Yes.
Be involved in Squibby. I'm a silent Squibby member. I don't get too many meetings.
So people probably don't know what Squibby is, Sue. That's the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. A really good organisation to get involved with if you want to find out more about writing for children, and it's excellent for networking. They meet quarterly in Docklands, and they always have an industry speaker. So that'll be an editor from a publishing house coming and talking exactly what they're looking for, which is really great if you can get, if they say, we want more books that are social and emotional learning, for example, and you'd be like, I reckon I've got one of those in my bottom drawer, and then you can pull it out and send it to them. So I would highly recommend.
Yep. They also do newsletters where, they'll say this one's happening, this grant's around, apply for that. And it's international. So, I've got friends who, when they've gone overseas, have contacted the Squibby local chapter and they've gone to a meeting. So and there's a heap of free online courses, aren't there? They do a lot of those, mainly the overseas ones. So it's Squibby, so it's SC, I always get this around the wrong way, Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, so SCBWI, have I got that right? Yep. But if you're really interested in writing, I'd highly recommend
they're
that.
a good one.
We 3 are you?
Yep.
I'm you guys?
Yep.
Yep.
I'm not a member, but I go to the events.
Yeah,
you don't have to be a member. You just pay a bit extra
go.
And go to the events, and I follow them, so I find them really useful.
Yeah.
And I think it's only $5 extra.
It's not a lot. Yeah.
So once we've got through that important acquisitions meeting and everyone said, yes, we think this can be a book, the next stage is the publisher will look for an illustrator. So contrary to what a lot of people think, authors don't usually get to choose their illustrators. It's usually up to the publisher. However, the publisher will have like a short list of illustrators, and they will contact you and say, you know, these are the people we're thinking about. Go and have a look at their social media presence, see what you think, see if you think, you know, who you think is going to be the best fit for your book. And you'll have a look and you'll say, okay, I want cat, fox.
Yeah.
Cat.
So this is actually quite interesting. There are different levels of publishing houses as well. So you've got the what we call the top 5, then we have the indie publishers, all those sorts of things, vanity publishers, but we're not talking about that. But
Actually, probably a good thing to explain what it is, vanity.
So-
Do you guys know what vanity publishing is? Does anyone not know?
okay,
Okay.
all right.
Yeah, just
So
go over it.
vanity publishing is where I think it's on the cusp of self-publishing. Really, it's where someone's taken the opportunity to say, okay, well, for this amount of money, we can do all the production of your book, basically, and we can get it printed, and we can even take care of the distribution for you, but you are paying a certain fee towards them to do it. Whereas traditional publishing is, they're literally interested in your pure talent. They find something in your book and they want to make it, and they know for a publisher to take your book, they would have confidence that it will sell. In the end of the day, the bottom line is there for them. And for my situation, I found I was given the words, and I was given absolute free rein to showcase, to come up with the illustrations. I didn't talk to the author, so it was kept quite separate. And there was a lot of contracts in place. I was given, actually, they send me through a document that basically covers when I need to send things into them. So they want the storyboard sent through by this time. They want the character sketches sent through by this time. I had to wait for approval at every stage. They'd come back with any changes.
Sorry, can I just interrupt you there? Can you just explain for our audience what a storyboard is?
Oh, sorry. So as an illustrator, that is where I take the text from the author. It's broken down into the pages. And then it's like it's like each page of the book that's been divided up into little squares, and then we sketch out roughly what's going to go on in each one of them. So could be like an A3 piece of paper, and it's divided up into those page spreads. We call them page spreads. So it's a way of being able to see that your compositions run smoothly, and if you zoom out, that's what it's about. And then once it's agreed, you can start to embellish it more and zoom it up and do the bigger page spreads and bring everything together. But it is a process of back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, before finally you get it together. And there's a lot of deadlines, strict deadlines. Another thing, though, with working with traditional publishers, I thought I'd mention as well, is you're paid, what do we call it, an advance. Mm-hmm. And you go, oh, really? That's not a lot of money. And you go, that's a load of rubbish. That means I'm being paid $1 an hour. But can I tell you, moving on a few years onwards, it's nice when you see the royalties and the lending rights and all those sorts of things pop into your bank account. And you go, actually, it is probably worth doing a few more of these books and working for traditional publishers, because it starts to build up that nice money that just comes in for the life of the book.
Do you know what lending rights are?
Yeah, you can explain that.
So there's two lots. There's public lending rights and educational lending rights, ELR, PLR, and you'll see authors go quite weak at the knees over it, because every library has to account for what they've got, and then we get paid a certain amount. I think it's 25 cents a book, but it can end up being, like people, John Marsden, for example, his ELR, PLR was $100,000 one year. This is years ago. And he actually bought a farm with it. So it can be, when you've got a lot of books, it can be really good. And you actually can earn more from ELR, PLR than you do from your royalties. Does everyone know what an advance is? Yeah? And everyone understand royalties? If you don't, put your hand up, because beautiful. So advance, the publisher says, I'm going to publish your book. I'm going to give you $1,000 up front. Yeah. But you've got to sell that amount of books of yours, because you get to 5%. So if Kat and I were doing a book, it'd be 5% each, and then we'd have to sell out our 5% worth of books before we got any royalties. Does that make sense?
But basically the publisher, we go in as the creatives, but we don't have to worry about the distribution and the selling. Once we've done our job, it's up to them. and they get it out there. And we should, by rights, be remunerated for the life of the
But
book.
don't get carried away with that, because now the push is you must do your publicity. They expect you to be on Facebook, Instagram,
Oh, yeah.
TikTok I'm not touching. They expect you to do publicity for your book. So don't rely on them to do it all. They don't. They really don't. They won't give you money for a launch anymore. Well, mind you, they used to give you $100. But, you know, it's up to you, and they rely on you to do that, because publishing at the minute has been cut to the bone and they just don't have the money for it.
So there, from an illustrator's point of view, it's quite important to build your presence on. I'd say simply Instagram is a great place to build your presence, and reels work, show behind the scenes, all that stuff. Tag people, really good tags, because it gets the publisher's attentions as well.
So, and back to one thing with the illustrator. No, the publisher will ask you, what style of illustration do you think would suit your book? So say Bob Graham, say whatever. Know a known Australian publisher, illustrator that you can go, I like Cat Fox's designs, I think that would suit. And then they will find who they think, who's available, blah, 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 who they can then get.
Cat, is it Illustrators Australia? Where the...
So I used ASA, the Australian Society of
Style
Authors,
files?
have style files.
Style files,
So you
yep.
you put in your folio for review, they open a submission for that, and then you do pay money for it, and then that is where a lot of the publishers go. But to be honest, a lot of them use hashtags on Instagram looking for things as well. So they look out of that range as well. So, but it's really important that you do bring together a good portfolio of your range of what you can do, not just the books you've done.
Mm.
Yeah.
We've...
We'll do
A
questions at the
couple
end.
of you have touched on distribution, which I personally feel is really critical to selling your book. So there's different distributors, and what that basically means is they're companies that get your books into bookstores, and that can be a challenge for self-published authors.
Yeah.
So with that, I'd like to segue into how we go from go to woe with a self-published manuscript. Sally, can you kick us off on that discussion?
I can. I've written some notes because it's a process. My first book was published, Food for Me is Gluten-Free. I can see it's just up there now. It was published in 2007. So I want to talk about my journey. It's very different to today, because today you can go online and you can find all the answers. How do I self-publish a book? I looked it up before.
Oh, yeah.
Bing! Up came all sorts of things. In Sally's world, how do I self-publish a book? I have no idea, but I'm going to wake up tomorrow and figure out what I do next. So the first thing is you need an idea, and you need an idea, as far as I'm concerned, that you're passionate about, that needs to be shared, and it needs to meet a market that has a demand. I knew that mine already did, because there were no children's picture books about celiac disease. So I was like, oh, that's already ticked, but that's not why I wrote it. But just realising in hindsight, oh gosh, I had a market there that had a gap. Do you want me to tell you the amount of money that you need to set aside? $10,000. So you need to say, I'm prepared to spend $10,000 on this project up front. Because when you self-publish, you need to pay for everything in advance. Identify your target market. Obviously, these are picture books, but it's about the age of the child. I was pretty wrong with that, because I didn't realise that my books were going to have a target market of adults. I'm not talking about my 2 allergy books, but I'm talking about my location books. So Lit at Bay Treasure is about Lawn. How many people have a holiday house in Lawn, have grandkids that go to Lawn, etc., etc. So a lot of adults bought my books, Melbourne Magic, people who have lived in Melbourne, grown up in Melbourne. So I was wrong there, but it benefited me. So that was okay. Write your manuscript. same thing as traditional publishing, but you edit it and edit it and edit it and edit it and edit it. And I spent a lot of time. I love words and language. So I got a kick out of, using a thesaurus and thinking, oh, what's another word for that? What's another word for that? Because every word counts. Less is more. I've got to find the right word. Leave it, go back to it, leave it, go back to it. I'm talking leave it for a week, go back to it, etc., etc. I also got my own kids to read the story as well. And I am a child really like Kat, so I see through the eyes of a child. I'm very childlike as well in that thinking, what would I want if I was a child? So looking through that lens. I also used, when you've written it, you then need to edit it once you've written the manuscript. There are two ways of doing this. You can either pay an editor to do it, or you can self-edit. And I self-edited, and I used hand-picked people in my life that I wanted their opinion from different lenses. So, for example, 2 of them were girlfriends and 1 of them was my niece. And I knew would be super critical. Yeah, really important. Not just, oh, Sally, it's great. No, I want you to be super critical. Yeah. I want you to tell me that's nonsense, that's rubbish, that doesn't sound good. What were you thinking? And then I want you to go back and look at it again for language and spelling and all those things. Then I needed to commission an illustrator. And so I went onto that Australian Illustrators website, and I think I got 5 illustrators. I don't know if this is how you do it today, who all drew me a pencil outline of an illustration. And then I chose who I wanted, and in fact the person I chose went beyond and illustrated it in watercolour, and in fact we used that original in the story, which was amazing. Yeah. So then I paid my illustrator up front, so we negotiated a price. I actually used a guy that had never illustrated a picture book before. He had a full-time job. He's only ever illustrated my books. He's done all 8 of them. And so we created a partnership and a connection. I think someone was talking before about the value of the text and the illustrations speaking the same language. So we developed that relationship. In the beginning, he would sketch out bits and pieces, and I would be, oh no, that's not really how I see it, because I had a vision of what I wanted. He came and he met my family, because Food for Me is Gluten-Free was about my whole family. He met my family, he played with my kids, he got to get a sense of who they were as people, because I wanted real people in those books. And then once I approved the illustrations, I had that beautiful creative license to say, no, that's not what I'm quite wanting. Could you redo this and redo this? And in the first book and the second book, we did a fair few redos. By the 8th book, there was barely a redo, because he could see into my mind, and we would get together. We'd actually meet in a library room just to be in the library space, and we would talk out. Well, I see this. What do you see? I see. Actually, you know what? I like that idea, Stu. Let's do it. So that is how I got an illustrator, but you need to pay for an illustrator. Then you need to plan the design of your book. So I did a lot of looking at picture books that were not self-published, because it's very important to me that my book did not look self-published, if that makes sense. Some books look self-published. Most people don't even know my books are self-published. So for me to be here today and be kind of talking about that is very new. Most people have no idea. I knew what I didn't want, and I knew what I did want. Really important to know what you don't want. I don't want it to look like that. So I guess I was using a concept of I want it to just be a book, not someone go, is that published traditionally or self-published? It's a book, it's a story, we love it because of the story and the illustrations. So it just so happened that my illustrator was a graphic designer.
Yeah.
Helpful.
Oh, Lord, they all are.
Helpful. So we did that process together. I paid him extra money to create the design of the cover, the back cover, the front cover, and then to graphically design the whole layout of the book and all the different elements. And as well as that, you need to purchase something called an ISBN. Does anyone know what an ISBN is? Yeah, anyone not sure? Yep, okay, so it's an international standard book number and you find it on top of the barcode. So I needed an ISBN and a barcode, so I'm going to give you the name of Thorpe Bowker, THORPE If you Google Thorpe Bowker, they are the people where you can go and purchase ISBNs and barcodes from. I created my own publishing house, just because I did, just because I guess nothing was around then. And I was like, I need a publishing house. What will I call it? Sandcastle Press. Do you want me to tell you that story? So I went and I thought,
Sorry,
what am I going to
Sally,
call? No,
Sally,
no
I'm just going to
time.
cut in. We need to leave time for questions, so if I can get you to wrap up
I shall wrap
fairly
up.
quickly.
So I created that, which was an acronym for all the members of my family, and there was one letter missing, which was an S, and then Stuart came along as my illustrator. Bingo. So after you format, you typeset, you choose a printing option. My books were all actually printed as real books. You receive proofs from the printing company, you approve them, you get an advanced copy and you drink champagne. You then receive stock and you fill your garage up with thousands of books. You launch the book, you promote and market the book, and the day you think that you are married to the local newsagent is the day you decide that you need a distributor. Because I'm in there so frequently posting the books myself. So you need to get, a distributor needs to approve distributing your books if they think they're going to make money. And that's how you do it.
Excellent. Thanks, Sally. Kat, did you have anything to add to
I
that?
was only going to say I have worked with a lot of self-publishing authors, and it's a bit of a double-edged sword for me. There's a love-hate. The love is the fact that I do love the partnership. I love the sharing of ideas, the getting together we pretty much get together on Zoom, a lot of them, and we just brainstorm. You really do birth a book together, even though the initial text came from there. And some books I've actually had the power to kind of suggest rewrites and things. But I am the kind of person that, from my perspective now, I haven't got time. If you haven't had your book praised or properly edited, I'm not being funny, I've got my drawings with some not so great books. So now it's to the point where you've got to make sure it's quality. And I actually recommend people to appraise. Appraisal is where they make sure it's, like editing, it's just making sure it all flows properly and it works well. So usually authors are really, really good. So published authors, I get those done by then. So the self-publishing journey I did as well, a bit like you, Cat and Fox, the label, I became a bit of my own publishing house too. So I had my own graphic design team, I had my own printer, I had someone who did appraisals and editing, and I used to get people literally coming to me with their book, and I would help them through the process. So it's a lot of work, but you do get a lot more control out of it. I get a lot of business owners who have, say, hairdressing salons and ideas, and they go, actually, a book is a really good marketing tool. So they don't see the book as the way they make the money. They see the book as a way to market their idea. And my latest one quickly is just My Anxiety is Called Bob. And it's an Instagrammer called The Bored Toddler, Christy Richards. And the idea was her son had basically written it and drawn it, but basically I set up the graphic design, the whole book, everything, and done some more illustrations with her son's illustrations. But it's become an amazing marketing tool for her business, which is to do with children's toys and stuff like that. So a book could work alongside a business idea really well. Anyway, I'll stop.
Thanks, Kat. That sounds adorable. So we have about 10 minutes time for questions. Yes.
Practicalities. Anyway, Ted Riley, Geelong Road. Do we know of... Hi, do I need this? Do we know of anyone who is a registered publisher's agent living in Geelong and region?
I don't.
No.
I don't.
Okay. Now, that's one of the problems. Geelong and region has a population of 300,000, which is the population of Iceland.
Wow.
It's a population of a country, right? We do not have a publisher's agent living in this region. We do not have a publishing house,
We don't.
right?
Sorry, do you have a question for the panel?
Well, this is the question. What do we do as writers and illustrators in rectifying that situation? How do we take control of our cultural profile in the world? Because we don't need to go on our knees up to Lenenburg or across to Sin City. We need to stand on our own 2 feet, and we need to do something, and it's getting to be rather late.
Okay, thanks. Anybody?
I'm a
want-
registered publishing house here in Geelong.
Oh,
Just saying,
okay. Did you want to respond to that?
I'll look into becoming a publishing agent as well. So just give me 12 months and I'll leave.
Beautiful. And
There
you
you go.
also had a question?
Anyone wants to come and talk to me about publishing, please do.
Excellent. Did you
I think-
also have a question?
No.
No. Oh, okay. Sure.
And just on one comment with that, the thing we've got to remember too, in the publishing world, Australia is tiny. You know, if you get, at the minute they're doing 500 to 1,000 runs of picture books, it used to be 3,000. And so a publisher, a traditional publisher, won't take on your work unless it will sell. It's like when I've started in radio, I got the shock of my life. I spent 18 years in radio. I got the shock of my life that radio is not about the music, it's about the advertising.
Absolutely.
And it's the same with books. Books are not about great literature, they're not about great story, they're about what sells. And that's where that is prohibitive, trying to just write unique Geelong stuff, because it'll only sell here.
Yeah.
You know, it might sell a little bit, but you won't sell big numbers.
We've got another question at the back here. We're not trying to depress them, Sue.
No, but I've still got to be honest.
Sorry, this is probably not a question either, but we've published 3 books of Steve's. They're not children's books, they're adult books, but it's through a company called Ingram Spark,
Yeah.
and they basically have the whole self-publishing thing. You go onto their website and it cuts out a lot of the... and they print on demand, so you don't need to have all your books in the garage anymore.
And have you had a good experience with them?
Yeah, they've been
Yeah.
very good. You don't make any money. You get a tiny, tiny percentage and then it gets cut and cut and cut. But it's still worth looking into, because a lot of it eases the process of getting a book in your hands.
I've used them too with
Yeah.
some of mine, and it has been very quick turnaround. They're very professional from that point of view. But yes, you won't make a lot of money out of using them, but it's a way to get some books done. Yeah.
Can I just comment on that, because I didn't say it? So as a self-publisher doing what I did, the process, I make all that money's mine. If
So
I
did
get
you make your 10,000 back?
Oh, I've sold 20,000 books. I've made my money over and over and over again. But
Do you think that's because you really tapped into a niche that was
clearly I'm clearly a
underserved?
genius, but
Well, aside from that.
thank you. I didn't. It wasn't never about making money, or even I remember my husband said, "It doesn't matter if we get our money back or not, because being able to write a book for Lachlan is priceless." it just so happens, I think, yes, that I found niches and that people connect with how I write and how we illustrate and how we tell a story. And I just do also, I think if you go in there not thinking I'm making money, but I'm sharing a message that connects with people and I want people to feel something when they read my work, that works, I think.
Yeah.
That's my story.
We've got a question over here.
Hello, thanks for such a wonderful discussion. You all mentioned that you're pen to paper people, and as probably most of us are too. I'm just wondering, what programs do you use when you transfer it to the computer? And even like, is it Adobe Illustrator? I mean, I'm only Microsoft Word, so anything more than that would be great.
So well, as an illustrator, I actually at the moment just work completely on something called Procreate, which is using my iPad Pro, my pen. Which takes out a lot of the middleman for having to use Photoshop or Adobe Photoshop. From the self-publishing side, my graphic designer and myself, we work in InDesign. Adobe InDesign for publishing is a really good one for setup. But I have had another graphic designer who only set it up in Illustrator as well. But Adobe, yes, it's the way to go, and it's worth learning that. So, yeah.
And for your manuscript, just Word, the equivalent with Mac.
Grammarly.
And there's a particular way to set it out. So check the publisher's website if you're going traditional, and they'll tell you how they want it.
Yeah, they send you through a document of all the stipulations, don't they? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There is a program called Scrivener, which is apparently good for novel writers. I've tried it. It's one of those ones where it takes you longer to sort of learn the program, in my experience, learn the program than, you could have written 3 chapters. So I didn't continue with it, but, that is another program that you might
explore it if you want to. I
Yeah.
found my notebooks, I have notebooks that I stick things in and write. That's a better planning tool for me than Scrivener. I just use straight Word.
Yeah, I would say with initial ideas for drawing even, I just have a sketchbook and I sit there and I draw. Yeah.
Just adding on to that, what you just said, do you do pen to paper, and then when you give it to, say, submitting it to a... So you start with pen to paper, and then when you're going to submit it to a publisher, you just said check what the publisher wants, but if they don't specify it, do you just send it kind of as just a manuscript, or do you break
manuscript.
it down?
Don't worry about putting in pages.
Yeah.
Some
but
vary,
type
some
it.
don't like it. And you can also put if your book respects 79 words, and so there's no illustration guide. And in traditional publishing, you don't work with your illustrator right till the end. So you've got to have hints for your illustrator in there, and I will put in brackets just suggestions for illustrator if it isn't really clear in the text what you're writing about. Straight double space usually, so that they can write in it, double space, plain font. Don't be doing fancy fonts, not even for a headline. They have a breakdown over fancy fonts. And don't send anything fancy. I've seen publishers open a box that's got all this tinsel and crap in the manuscript, and they haven't even read the manuscript. They've thrown it in the bin. Just let your story stand on your own.
Well, it's all email these days anyway.
Yeah,
so
let your story stand on its own.
Yeah. You made me think of something that we didn't cover, and that is that these days, as a general rule, picture books are 500 words or less. Usually average, I would say, about 350 words.
Yep.
And can I add to that from an illustrator's point of view? I get fed up with some self-publishing authors write too many descriptive words. You don't actually really need them, because when you're teed up with a good illustrator, you really, I did a workshop with Jackie French. I worked with Jackie French, and she was talking to me and saying about Diary of a Wombat. He went off, I think it's Brett, I can't remember the full name of I never remember
Bruce
names.
Watley.
Bruce Watley.
So he ended up doing, her advice to him and to me was, you don't necessarily even need words, you can have and then, and let the illustrations talk for themselves. If you have that ability as an illustrator, you can write a story just with pictures. So sometimes when I get texts and it says, and the little girl is wearing a green dress and her face looked really sad. I'm like, well, I don't actually, I know that helps me as a note, but it should have just been the little girl climbed up the tree, and I could have added that in with your illustrator notes. So, yeah.
And when the illustrations come back, you'll see yourself, you'll look at your manuscript and go, oh,
Take
I
that
don't
out.
need that.
Yeah,
I don't
and
need
that's the
that.
other
I
thing,
don't
yeah.
need that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So publishers will often advise people to try and write with a view to illustration. If you can sort of imagine what's in your head, then you shouldn't need to describe it in the words. I can see that there's more questions. I'm afraid we've run out of time. But if you want to see us after the panel, we will be downstairs signing books. So I'll just do our... I really should have worn my glasses for this, but anyway, I'll just finish this up. Thank you to our panellists for a wonderful and engaging discussion. And thank you you've been a great audience. I've really enjoyed, the questions that you've asked. I would like to remind you that the Festival Bookseller, the Bookbird, has a pop-up bookstore on the ground floor, Key Curie Niche, operating all day today. So there you can purchase books by all of the local authors featured in Local Word, including back copies and previous titles. We'll also be signing books on the ground floor over the next half hour or so for anyone who would like to get a book signed. And of course, many of our titles are also available through Geelong Libraries. Today's event has been recorded. If you'd like to watch or listen to the discussion again or recommend it to friends or family, it'll be uploaded to the library's YouTube channel within the next couple of days. Thank you to Geelong Regional Libraries for hosting this important discussion, and thank you all for attending.
Oh, thank you, Heather, for chairing as well.